My name is Dorian Marston. For the longest time, that name felt less like an identity and more like a label on a piece of lost luggage. This is the story of how I spent years feeling like an outsider, a ghost haunting the hallways of my own family. If you've ever felt like you didn't belong, like you were invisible even to the people who were supposed to see you most clearly, then maybe you'll understand. But even if you haven't, I need you to hear this. It's about a boy who collected scars the way other kids collected baseball cards, and how he eventually stumbled his way back into the light. I was born in a quiet little Ohio town where the streets were paved with golden leaves in the fall and everyone knew each other's business. My family, though, was an island of secrets in a sea of neighborly chatter. My mother, Diana, passed away in the sterile quiet of a hospital room just days after I was born. A pulmonary embolism, they said. A cruel random act of fate. All I have of her is a single faded photograph my grandpa will keeps in his wallet. A woman with kind eyes and a smile that seemed to hold a universe of warmth. She was the one light I never got to meet, the one love I was born already missing. My father, Gregory Marston, was a man carved from silence and duty. He managed a local insurance company with a quiet competence that earned him a respectable, if not remarkable, living. In his eyes, I was a constant, painful reminder of the wife he had lost. My existence was the period at the end of a tragic sentence he was forced to read every day. When I was 3, he married Susan, a woman whose smile was as bright and brittle as cheap porcelain. She had sharp, calculating eyes that missed nothing and forgave even less. A year later they had a son, Benjamin, Ben for short. And just like that, the world shifted on its axis. Ben was their sun, their moon, their entire celestial sphere. To my father, Ben was the continuation, the future of the Marston name, a fresh start unburdened by grief. To Susan, Ben was the culmination of all her ambitions, a princeling to be coddled and spoiled and paraded. And me? I became a satellite, orbiting their perfect little world, close enough to feel its gravity but never allowed to land. I was just the step-kid, the leftover, a faint shadow in the house I was supposed to call home. Lessons in worthlessness. The difference was a language I learned before I could even read. It was spoken not in words, but in the distribution of toys, the temperature of a glance, the allocation of space. When I was 5, I remember Christmas morning with a clarity that still stings. The living room was a wonderland of wrapping paper and pine needles. Ben, giddy with excitement, tore into a massive box to reveal a gleaming red remote control monster truck, the kind with giant rubber wheels that was advertised relentlessly on Saturday morning cartoons. My own gift was a small, lumpy package. Inside was a plastic police car, its blue paint already chipped, one of its wheels stubbornly refusing to turn. It was a cast-off from a church donation bin. "It's good enough for you," my dad said, his voice flat as he watched Ben send the monster truck crashing into the leg of the coffee table. Susan knelt beside Ben, her voice a syrupy coo. "Ben needs new, stimulating toys to develop his brilliant mind." She glanced at me and for a second her mask slipped. Her eyes said what her mouth didn't dare: "You aren't worth the investment." This pattern became the blueprint of my childhood. Good grades on my report card earned a curt nod from Dad. "Not bad," he'd murmur, "but don't get complacent." But when Ben scraped by with AC in math, it was cause for a full-blown celebration, an ice cream cake and a trip to the movies. "He's trying so hard," Susan would exclaim, ruffling his hair. "He has a creative mind, not a technical one." I wasn't a jealous child by nature. My desires were simple: a kind word, a shared laugh, a moment of being seen. I just wanted to be loved. But as the years stacked up, a cold, hard truth settled in my bones. In their eyes I would never measure up. I was a problem they had inherited, a responsibility they bore with weary resentment. Susan's words were tiny poison darts. "Dorian, why can't you be more outgoing like Ben? You should be thankful you have a roof over your head and food on the table." She'd say these things with a gentle, concerned tone that made them all the more damaging. They made me question my own reality, made me wonder if I was indeed the ungrateful burden she painted me to be. Our house wasn't a mansion, but it was comfortable. Dad's job provided a steady middle-class life. But it never felt like my home. My room was a cramped, converted attic space. The ceiling sloped so low on one side I couldn't stand up straight, the single window looked out onto a grimy back alley, and the floorboards creaked with every step like an old man's bones. In the summer it was an oven, in the winter a freezer. Ben's room, on the other hand, was a sun-drenched sanctuary on the second floor. It was twice the size of mine, filled with video game consoles, sports posters, and a constant rotation of new gadgets. Once, when I was about 10, I gathered the courage to ask my dad why I couldn't have a proper room downstairs. We were in the garage and he was polishing his golf clubs. He didn't even look at me. "Don't get greedy, Dorian," he snapped, his voice sharp and sudden. "Know your place. Know your place." Those 3 words became the bars of my invisible cage. I learned to live within them, to make myself smaller, quieter, less demanding. I learned to smile and pretend everything was fine, even when a storm of loneliness and confusion was raging inside me. I made a silent promise to the cracked ceiling of my attic room. One day I would get out. I would escape their shadow and prove, if only to myself, that I was not the worthless person they saw. When I turned 18, I graduated high school. I didn't make valedictorian, but my grades were solid, especially in math and science. I had a small group of friends who knew me as the quiet, reliable guy. At home, the milestone passed with barely a ripple. Dad was at a conference, and Susan gave me a $20 bill and told me not to do anything stupid. My dream was to go to college to become a structural engineer. I loved the idea of building things that lasted, of creating order and strength out of chaos. It was a future I thought would make Grandpa Will proud. He was the only one who ever asked about my dreams, the only one who seemed to believe I had any. That summer, I spent weeks researching state universities, filling out financial aid forms, and writing application essays. One evening, armed with a folder full of brochures and scholarship applications, I found my dad in his study. He was sitting at his desk, paying bills. The air was thick with the scent of old paper and the faint, bitter smell of his evening whiskey. "Dad," I started, my voice trembling slightly, "I wanted to talk to you about college. I found some good programs, and if I can get some loans and maybe a scholarship." He held up a hand, cutting me off. He looked at me, and his eyes were as cold and gray as a winter sky. "Dorian, we don't have the money for that." "But, for loans," I stammered. "I could work part-time. I just need a cosigner, maybe a little help with the initial costs." "The answer is no," he said, his voice final. "Ben has to be the priority. He's got so much potential and we need to invest in him. A private business school is expensive. All our resources are going towards his future." I just stood there stunned. The floor felt like it was tilting beneath my feet. Ben, my half-brother who spent most of his time playing video games and whose greatest ambition was to own a sports car, was the one with potential. I didn't argue. I didn't plead or cry. A lifetime of being told my needs came second had taught me the futility of it. I just nodded, a single jerky motion, and walked out of the room. That night, lying on my creaky bed in the sweltering attic, staring at the familiar cracks in the ceiling, I made a new promise to myself. It wasn't about proving them wrong anymore. It was about surviving. If they wouldn't believe in me, I would have to believe in myself twice as hard. My life after that became a blur of grim necessity. I got a job at the local Walmart, starting as a cashier. The forced smiles, the endless beep of the scanner, the irate customers, it was soul-crushing. Soon I took on overnight stocking shifts for the extra pay. The work was physically brutal. Lifting heavy boxes, racing against the clock, my body ached constantly. But I never complained. Every dollar I earned was a brick in the wall I was building between my past and my future. Within a year, I saved enough for a security deposit on a tiny, run-down apartment on the other side of town. The walls were stained with years of other people's lives, the faucet in the kitchen sink dripped a maddening, incessant rhythm, and the radiator clanked like a ghost in chains. It was a dump. But it was mine. For the first time in my life, I had a key to a door that led to a space where I didn't have to apologize for existing. I didn't have to hear Susan's passive-aggressive digs or see the flicker of disappointment in my father's eyes. The silence was a balm. Meanwhile, Ben was living the life they had chosen for him. He was enrolled in a prestigious private business school 2 hours away, driving a brand-new sedan my father had bought him as a going-away present. He came home on holidays expecting his laundry to be done and his every whim catered to. One afternoon, Susan came into my Walmart. She was buying expensive organic groceries. She saw me behind the register, wearing my blue vest, my name tag askew. A smirk played on her lips. "Dorian, is this what you're doing with your life?" she asked, her voice dripping with faux pity. "What a shame. I suppose someone has to do this kind of menial work. I'm just so glad Ben will never have to." I gritted my teeth, forced a customer service smile, and scanned her kale. "That'll be $127.48, I said, my voice hollow. Inside, a familiar question screamed in the void. Why? Why wasn't I good enough for the same chances? Those years were a grind. Friends from high school drifted away, their lives moving forward on tracks of college parties and career paths while mine was stuck on a loop of work, eat, sleep, repeat. But I wasn't entirely alone. My one beacon was Grandpa Will. He'd call from Chicago, his gruff, booming voice a lifeline through the static of my lonely existence. He'd talk about the skyscrapers he was building, the challenges of pouring concrete in the freezing Chicago wind. He'd ask about my life and I'd give him the edited version. I told him I was working hard and saving money. I never told him the full truth about how my dad and Susan treated me, about the attic room or the crushed college dream. I didn't want him to worry, and a part of me was ashamed, scared he'd think I was weak for not fighting back harder. Grandpa was the only one who ever spoke of my mom. Diana was a gentle soul, he'd say, his voice thick with a sorrow that time had not dulled. She loved books and dreamed of a fairer world. She would have been so proud of the man you're becoming. He always blamed himself for not being there when she gave birth, for being stuck on a project in Dubai. If I'd been there, maybe things would have been different, he'd say. I never blamed him. I just held on to his stories of her, tiny fragments of a love I'd never known. As the years passed, I settled into my solitary life. I learned to fix a leaky faucet, to cook a decent meal for one, and to patch the holes in my own heart. But deep down there was an emptiness, a void where a family was supposed to be. I had no idea that while I was meticulously building my small, independent life, my father and Susan were constructing a monumental lie. A secret that was about to detonate, leveling everything I thought I knew about my past and my future. I was 21 and my life had found its rhythm, a monotonous but stable drumbeat of graveyard shifts at the supermarket I'd moved to, empty mornings spent trying to sleep as the world woke up, and quick, solitary meals. I didn't have much, but I had my freedom and a sliver of self-respect I'd clawed for with every shift worked and every biting comment I'd swallowed. One afternoon my phone buzzed with a text from Susan. "Come to the new house tonight. 1432 Hollow Creek. Small party." I read it 3 times. A new house? They hadn't mentioned moving. My first instinct was to ignore it. What was the point? I'd just be a piece of awkward furniture in a room full of their friends. But a small, foolish part of me hoped. Maybe this was an olive branch. Maybe, with a new house, they wanted a new start. I stopped at a liquor store on the way and bought a bottle of red wine I couldn't really afford. I also brought a small gift I'd been working on in my rare spare time. A simple linen handkerchief I'd embroidered with my father's initials, GM. It was a small, perhaps pathetic gesture, but it was all I had to offer. Hollow Creek was a world away from my side of town. It was a new development of sprawling, immaculate houses with manicured lawns and 3-car garages. Number 1432 was a handsome cream-colored house with a stone facade and elegant arched windows. Standing in front of the heavy oak door, my heart hammered against my ribs. I felt like an intruder about to walk into a life that was never meant for me. Susan opened the door, dressed in a silk blouse, her makeup perfect, her smile a thin, taut line. "Oh, Dorian. You came. Come in." The inside was breathtaking. Polished hardwood floors gleamed under a grand chandelier in the 2-story foyer. A massive stone fireplace dominated the living room. It smelled of new paint and money. On the walls, a gallery of professionally taken family photos was already in place. Gregory and Susan on their wedding day, Ben in his football uniform holding a trophy, the 3 of them laughing on a beach. Not a single picture of me. I wasn't surprised, but it still twisted something in my gut. My father was in the kitchen, pouring drinks for a few guests. He looked more relaxed than I'd ever seen him. He just gave me a cursory nod. "Oh, you're here." I handed him the wine and the small, wrapped gift. He glanced at them without interest and set them on a crowded counter. They were immediately swallowed by a sea of gourmet appetizers. The party was a small gathering of their new neighbors and some of Dad's colleagues. They talked about property values, the local golf club, and the in-ground pool they planned to build next summer. I found a corner and sat there, nursing a glass of water, a silent observer. No one spoke to me beyond a polite, dismissive nod. "We looked forever to find this house," I heard Susan bragging to a woman in pearls. "Gregory worked so hard for this. We were so lucky to get it just before the market went crazy." My dad, standing beside her, just smiled and nodded, the picture of a proud patriarch. I tried to feel happy for them, I really did. I sat there, trying to smile, celebrating their success, completely oblivious to the fact that I was sitting in the middle of their greatest deception, celebrating the theft of what was mine. That night, back in my dingy apartment, the rhythmic drip of the faucet seemed to mock the opulence I had just witnessed. I almost called Grandpa Will just to hear his voice, but a glance at the clock showed it was late in Chicago. I didn't want to bother him. I fell asleep, never suspecting that the foundation of my life was a lie, and the cracks were about to show. From that day on, something changed. Suddenly, I was included. For every major holiday, Thanksgiving, Christmas, even Ben's birthday, I'd get a curt text from Susan. 6 p.m. Dinner. Ben wants to see you. We're having guests. I would show up, always bringing a small, thoughtful gift, and they would always set it aside, unopened. And then came the photos. This was the newest, strangest part of the ritual. Dorian, come stand over here, Susan would command, waving her phone. Get closer to Ben. Let's get a nice family picture. I'd stand awkwardly at the edge of the group, a forced smile plastered on my face, feeling like a prop they dragged out of storage. I was a necessary component for the perfect family portrait they were trying to paint. They had never cared for photos with me before. In the old house, I was the family photographer, never in the frame. Why so many photos lately? I asked Susan once, after a particularly awkward session where she'd physically pushed me closer to my father. She just laughed, a high, tinkling sound that didn't reach her eyes. We're just capturing memories, silly. You're part of the family, aren't you? I wasn't an idiot. I knew something was deeply wrong. I felt like I was being used, my presence a key ingredient in a performance for an unseen audience. I just couldn't figure out who they were performing for. And then, on Christmas Eve, 2 years after they moved into the house on Hollow Creek, the entire charade came crashing down. I was 23. The Ohio air was sharp and frigid, the kind of cold that steals your breath. I was pulling on my threadbare coat, getting ready to head over to their house for the obligatory holiday dinner, when my phone rang. It was Grandpa Will. Dorian, get over here now, he said, his voice brimming with a rare, pure joy. I'm at your new house, 1432 Hollow Creek. Wanted to surprise you. My heart stopped. My blood turned to ice. Your new house. I didn't even reply. I threw on my jacket and flew out the door, my beat-up car sputtering to life in the freezing air. When I pulled up to the house, it was ablaze with festive lights. My grandpa's rental, a sleek black sedan, was parked in the driveway. Susan opened the door, her smile freezing on her face when she saw the panic in my eyes. Dorian, why are you? She began, but then Grandpa Will appeared behind me, his arm wrapping around my shoulders. Dorian, my boy, come in, he boomed, pulling me into a tight hug that smelled of woody cologne and cold air. This place is incredible. I knew you had good taste. Are you happy living here? I looked past him at my father, who had gone pale, and at Susan, whose eyes were wide with terror. I don't live here, Grandpa, I said, my voice a strained whisper. I just visit. The joyous atmosphere in the room evaporated instantly. Grandpa Will's face transformed. The smile vanished, replaced by a hard, dangerous stillness. His eyes, once sparkling, narrowed as they flickered from me to my father, then to Susan. Susan jumped in, her voice unnaturally high. Will, there's been a misunderstanding. Dorian likes his independence, living on his own, right, dear? She shot me a look that was a desperate, silent scream. Play along. But Grandpa wasn't looking at her. His gaze was locked on me. Dorian, tell me the truth. You don't live in this house. I live in a rented apartment across town, Grandpa, I said, the words feeling like stones in my mouth. I pay for it with my job at the supermarket. The silence that followed was so thick I could feel it pressing in on me. My dad's hand, holding a wine glass, began to tremble violently. Susan tried again, stumbling over her words. Well, we thought it was best for him. He wanted to be independent, and Ben needs his space to study and... Enough, Grandpa cut her off, his voice like the crack of a whip. He took a step toward my father. Gregory, explained this. 2 years ago, I wired you $400,000. It was a gift for Dorian to buy him a 3-bedroom house in this neighborhood, to give him a fresh start. I was explicitly clear. The house was to be in his name. So why in God's name is he living in a dump and working night shifts while you and your family are living in his house? My father's face was as white as the snow outside. Susan just stood there, her mouth hanging open. The world was spinning around me. A house. $400,000. A gift for me. My dad finally found his voice, a weak, reedy thing. I thought the house would be better utilized by the whole family. Dorian is so independent. He doesn't need a big house like this. Ben is young. He needs a stable, high-quality environment to grow up in. Doesn't need it? Grandpa roared, his voice echoing in the grand foyer. He pointed a trembling finger at me. Dorian, the grandson I trusted to your care, my daughter's only child, is working himself to the bone to survive, while you and your wife live like royalty in his house. What did you do with the money, Gregory? You put the house in your name, didn't you? My dad just stared at the floor, his shoulders shaking. Susan, finally finding her voice, took a step forward, her expression turning ugly. Well, you don't understand. Dorian isn't my real son. Ben is the future of this family. Ben is the one who will carry the Marston name with pride. Dorian? He doesn't deserve a house like this. He's just... Shut up. Grandpa thundered, his voice shaking the crystal chandelier. Doesn't deserve it? Dorian is Diana's blood. He is my blood. And I trusted you, Gregory. I trusted you to care for her son. But you didn't just neglect him, you stole from him. You lied to my face for 2 years with these fake family photos. He gestured wildly at the picture on the wall, the one from Thanksgiving where I was standing awkwardly on the edge. I thought he was living here happily with his family. I believed the happy fantasy you sold me. It was all a scam to hide your sickening greed. My throat was tight, my lungs burning. The photos, the forced holiday dinners, the sudden invitations. It was all a carefully constructed lie to keep Grandpa's money flowing and his suspicions at bay. I looked at my father, my own father, hoping for a flicker of remorse, a single word of apology. Nothing. He just kept his head down in shame. Dorian, Grandpa said, his voice softer now but filled with a steely resolve. He put a hand on my shoulder. Go get your things from your apartment. You're coming to Chicago with me. Tonight. This house. I'll make sure it becomes yours just like I always intended. And Gregory, he said, turning back to my father, expect a call from my lawyer. You are going to pay for this. Susan burst into theatrical sobs. My dad finally looked up, his eyes pleading with me. Dorian, I just wanted what was best for the family. Best for the family? I repeated, my voice eerily calm, ice cold. You mean your family? You never once saw me as a part of it. I spent my entire life trying to earn a single crumb of your approval, and all you ever saw was Ben. You didn't just steal a house from me. You stole my chance at a future, and you couldn't even be man enough to tell me the truth. I turned my back on him, on all of it. Let's go, Dorian, Grandpa said, his hand a firm, grounding presence on my shoulder. You don't have to stay here a second longer. The cold of that Christmas night felt different as we walked out of the house that should have been mine. It felt clean, sharp, like it was scouring away years of filth. Grandpa led me to a black SUV parked at the curb. A driver in a crisp suit held the door open. To the hotel, James, Grandpa said, his voice low and tight with fury. I slid into the plush leather seat, feeling like I'd stepped into another dimension. The opulent house, the Christmas lights, my father's crumbling face, it all felt like a scene from a movie I was watching from a great distance. You okay, Dorian? Grandpa asked, his voice gentle. I don't know what I am, Grandpa, I confessed, my own voice shaky. It's a lot to process. He just nodded, his jaw tight. I know. But from this moment on, things are going to be different. You're coming to Chicago. We'll start over. A real start this time. I looked out the window as we drove away, the festive lights of my stolen home blurring through the tears I didn't realize I was crying. Chicago. A new city. A new life. A chance to leave the ghost of Dorian Marston behind in Ohio. The next morning we were on an early flight. I watched the snow-covered Ohio fields shrink below, feeling a profound sense of dislocation. I was leaving the only life I'd ever known, a life of struggle and quiet endurance, for a future that was a complete unknown. When we landed at O'Hare, the Chicago wind hit me like a physical blow. James was waiting for us and we drove through the city, a canyon of steel and glass skyscrapers that made the buildings in my Ohio town look like dollhouses. We drove to an affluent neighborhood on the North Shore, where mansions sat back from the road behind stately trees and wrought iron fences. James stopped in front of a particularly impressive gate. Is this your place, Grandpa? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He let out a short, humorless laugh. Welcome home, Dorian. It's your home too now. His house wasn't a house, it was a palace. A grand foyer with a sweeping spiral staircase, marble floors and massive windows that overlooked a snow-dusted garden and a frozen swimming pool. The air smelled of pine, old leather and floor polish. I stood there, clutching my small duffel bag containing all my worldly possessions, feeling utterly and completely out of place. I don't know what to say, I whispered. You don't have to say anything, he said, leading me up the grand staircase. Your room's right here. He opened a door to a bedroom that was larger than my entire apartment. It had a king-sized bed with a mountain of pillows, a sleek new laptop sitting on a polished walnut desk, and a walk-in closet that was empty, waiting to be filled. This is where you start over, he said, his voice thick with emotion. No pressure. No baggage. Just a new beginning. I sat on the edge of the ridiculously soft bed, the silence of the mansion humming around me. Just yesterday I was a 23-year-old supermarket stocker living in a crumbling apartment. Now I was here. But the opulent surroundings couldn't erase the gaping wound that had been torn open. That house in Ohio and the lie it represented was still a shard of glass lodged in my heart. That evening, Grandpa took me to a classic Chicago steakhouse downtown. It was the kind of place with dark wood paneling, white tablecloths, and waiters in starched jackets. We sat in a quiet corner booth, and he ordered an expensive bottle of Cabernet Sauvignon. "Dorian," he began, his expression grim. "We need to talk. About your father, the house, and everything else." I nodded, my heart pounding against my ribs. 2 years ago, I sent Gregory the $400,000 for that house. I wanted it to be a foundation for you, a piece of security. My business was booming and I was too busy to handle the purchase myself, so I trusted him. It was a catastrophic mistake. His hand clenched into a fist on the table. But that's not all. That's not even the worst of it. He took a long sip of wine. "Since you were 5 years old, I have been sending Gregory money for you. Every month. It started as a few $100s for clothes and school supplies. When you got to high school, I increased it significantly, with specific instructions that it was for college prep, a car, your future education. All told, over the years, I've sent him well over $200,000 specifically for your care and your future." The steak knife in my hand clattered onto my plate. I stared at him, my mind unable to comprehend his words. All those years. The chipped plastic car. The attic room. The hand-me-down clothes that were always too big or too small. The instant noodles I lived on. The crushing exhaustion of working 2 jobs to save for a dream my father told me we couldn't afford. Could have all been different. He kept it? I stammered. All of it. Every last damn dime, Grandpa growled, his face a mask of fury. He used my money, the money meant for Diana's son, to fund his own comfortable life and spoil his golden boy, Ben. And he let you believe you were a financial burden. When I heard you tell me you were working nights at a supermarket, Dorian, the betrayal is deeper than you can imagine. Tears welled in my eyes when he mentioned my mother. She would have wanted me to have every chance in the world. The realization that my own father had so systematically stolen that from me, from her memory, ignited a cold, hard rage in my chest. "What are you going to do?" I asked, my voice shaking. "I'm going to sue him," Grandpa said, his voice like ice. "My lawyer is already drafting the complaint. We'll file for fraud, misappropriation of funds, everything. I will get that house transferred to your name and I will claw back every cent he stole. And I am cutting him off completely. He and that woman will never see another dollar from me as long as they live." I stared at the white tablecloth, my mind a whirlwind. A part of me, the part that had been starved and neglected for 2 decades, wanted retribution. I wanted to see them pay. But another, larger part of me, the part that had learned to survive by letting go, felt an overwhelming wave of exhaustion. I didn't want my new life in this incredible, intimidating city to be defined by a bitter legal battle with the people who had already taken so much from me. "Grandpa," I said, my voice quiet but firm, Don't sue him." He looked at me stunned. "What?" "Dorian, he robbed you blind. You have every right to get back what's yours." "I know. And I'm furious," I said, meeting his gaze. "But dragging this through the courts, it will just keep them in my life. It will be years of anger and fighting. You said you're cutting him off. That's enough. That's the real consequence. I don't want the house. I don't want the money if it means staying tethered to them. I just want to start over. Here. With you. Free and clear." He studied my face for a long moment, his own eyes softening. He reached across the table and put his hand on my shoulder. "You're stronger than I ever knew, Dorian. You have more of your mother's grace in you than I realized. She would be so proud." He sighed, a heavy, weary sound. "All right. We'll do it your way. No lawsuit." But he's cut off. Permanently. The next few weeks were a surreal journey of rediscovery. I was learning how to be a person again, not just a survivor. Grandpa didn't just give me a home, he gave me a purpose. He took me to the downtown headquarters of his company, Marston Construction, a gleaming office in a skyscraper his own firm had built. He walked me through the office, introducing me to everyone not as his grandson who needed a handout, but simply as Dorian Marston. For the first time I felt a name could be a source of pride, not shame. "Want to give it a shot?" he asked me one day, gesturing around the bustling office filled with architects and project managers. "You can start at the bottom. Learn the ropes. No special treatment." I hesitated. I knew nothing about construction beyond what he'd told me on the phone. But the look of unwavering trust in his eyes was a gift I couldn't refuse. "I'll give it my best shot, Grandpa. But I can't promise I'll be any good." He laughed, a deep, rumbling sound that filled his office. "Nobody starts out good, Dorian. But you've got guts and a good heart. That's a better foundation than concrete." I started as a project assistant, a glorified gopher. I organized blueprints, tracked supply shipments, and took notes in meetings where I barely understood half the terminology. It was humbling and incredibly difficult. But I was a fast learner, and for the first time in my life, I had a motivation that burned brighter than sheer survival. I was working toward something, not just away from something. I worked late, often being the last one to leave the office besides Grandpa. I read books on architectural design and engineering principles at night. I asked the site foreman endless questions, ignoring their skeptical looks until they saw I was genuinely interested. Slowly, respect began to replace suspicion. They saw I wasn't just the boss's grandson. I was Dorian, the guy who was always there, always working, always willing to learn. Outside of work, I began to explore Chicago. I'd spend weekends at the Art Institute, wander through Millennium Park, and sit in coffee shops in different neighborhoods, just reading and watching the city's vibrant life flow around me. I had room to breathe, to think, to simply be. But the old scars didn't fade overnight. Some nights, I'd wake up in my luxurious king-sized bed, my heart pounding, the ghost of Susan's mocking voice or my father's cold stare fresh in my mind. The feeling of being an imposter, of not deserving any of this kindness, was a shadow that clung to me. Grandpa always seemed to know. One evening he found me staring out the massive window in the living room, lost in thought. He quietly handed me an old, silver-framed photograph. It was my mother, Diana. She was younger, maybe my age, with a radiant smile, holding a scruffy little terrier. "Your mom always wanted you to be happy, Dorian," he said softly. "I couldn't be there for her when she needed me most. I won't make that mistake with you. You belong here." I clutched the photograph, a single tear tracing a path down my cheek. "I wish I could have met her," I whispered. "You have," he said, putting a comforting arm around my shoulders. "You're more like her than you know. You have her strength, her kindness. You just never had a chance to let it show." Months turned into a year. My life in Chicago began to feel real, solid. I was promoted from assistant to a junior project coordinator. I was given a small residential renovation project to oversee myself. It was a terrifying and exhilarating responsibility. I threw myself into it, working tirelessly, determined to prove Grandpa's faith in me was not misplaced. I was also starting to build a life outside of work in the mansion. I made a few friends at the company, and I had even started talking to a young architect named Clara. She was brilliant, witty, and had a laugh that made me forget for a few moments the shadows of my past. One Tuesday afternoon, my phone rang with an unknown Ohio number. I almost ignored it, but some morbid curiosity made me answer. "Dorian?" The voice was thin, hesitant. It was my father. I said nothing. The sound of his voice was like a key turning in a locked room inside me, releasing a flood of cold, dark memories. "Dorian, please," he said, his voice cracking. "We need to talk. Your grandfather, he's cut us off. Completely. Susan isn't taking it well. The house. The mortgage payments are huge. I might lose my job over the scandal. People are talking." "What do you want me to say, Gregory?" I asked, my voice flat and detached. Using his first name felt like severing a final chord. "I want you to talk to him," he pleaded, his voice rising in desperation. "Tell him you've forgiven us. Tell him to reconsider. We made a mistake, a terrible mistake, but we're your family. You can't just throw us away like this." A bitter laugh escaped my lips. "My family? When was I ever your family, Gregory? Was I family when I was sleeping in the attic? Was I family when you told me I wasn't worth sending to college? Was I family when you stole my mother's legacy from me and used it to buy a new life for yourself?" There was a choked silence on the other end. Then I heard Susan snatch the phone. "You ungrateful brat," she shrieked, her voice venomous. "After everything we did for you, we gave you a roof over your head. We fed you. This is how you repay us? By turning your rich grandfather against us and ruining our lives." "You ruined your own lives, Susan," I said calmly. The rage I expected to feel simply wasn't there. All I felt was a profound, weary pity for these small, grasping people. "You made your choices. Now you have to live with them. Don't ever call me again." I hung up the phone, my hand trembling slightly. Clara, who had been walking by my cubicle, stopped. "You okay, Dorian? You look like you've seen a ghost." I looked up at her concerned, intelligent eyes, and for the first time, I felt I could share the weight. Yeah, I said, managing a small, real smile. You could say that. But I think I just told it to go away for good. A few weeks later, a different call came. This time it was Ben. His voice was subdued, nothing like the arrogant kid I remembered. Dorian? It's Ben. What do you want, Ben? I just wanted to say I'm sorry, he mumbled. I didn't know. About the money, the house, all of it. Mom and Dad always just told me Grandpa was helping the whole family out. I was an idiot. I never questioned it. He paused. Things are bad here. Dad lost his job. They're selling the house. Well, your house. They have to. I listened, a strange mix of emotions swirling within me. I'd spent my whole life being overshadowed by him, but hearing the defeat in his voice, I didn't feel triumph. It's not your fault, Ben, I said, and I was surprised to find I meant it. You were just a kid. We both were. I'm dropping out of school, he said quietly. Can't afford it anymore. I got a job at a warehouse. It's humbling. He let out a dry, humorless chuckle. Mom's a wreck. She blames you for everything. Dad just drinks. I'm sorry to hear that, I said. Yeah, well, we had it coming, he admitted. Listen, the reason I called. I just wanted you to know that I never hated you. I was just oblivious. I'm sorry for being a part of it. It wasn't a grand apology, but it was honest. It was a small crack of light in a long, dark history. Thanks for calling, Ben, I said. Take care of yourself. Hanging up, I felt a sense of closure I hadn't expected. The world wasn't black and white. Ben wasn't a villain. He was just a product of his environment, just as I was. We had both been trapped in our parents' lies, just in very different ways. 2 years after I arrived in Chicago, my renovation project was complete. It was a beautiful old brownstone that we had modernized while preserving its historic character. There was a small ceremony to mark its completion, attended by the clients, architects, and our team. Grandpa Will was there, standing in the back, beaming with pride. After the clients had left, he walked over to me. Your mother would have loved this, he said, his voice thick. She always loved old houses, seeing the beauty in things that others had overlooked. Clara came and stood beside me, slipping her hand into mine. Our professional relationship had blossomed into a deep and loving partnership. She was my biggest supporter, my confidant, and the person who had taught me that I was worthy of love. You did amazing work, Dorian, she said, squeezing my hand. Standing there, in a building I had helped bring back to life, surrounded by the two people who meant the most to me, I finally felt whole. The ghost of the boy in the attic was gone. The scars were still there, faint lines that told the story of where I had been, but they no longer hurt. They were just a part of me, a reminder of the strength I never knew I had. My name is Dorian Marston. It's a name given to me by a mother I never knew and carried through the shadows by a father who never loved me. But it's also the name of a man who works for a company built by his grandfather, a man who is loved, respected, and happy. It's the name of a builder. And I was finally building a life that was strong, true, and entirely my own. I had found my way out of the shadow and into the light, and the future stretched before me as bright and limitless as the Chicago skyline.